Contaminated military equipment from Chernobyl has disappeared. Satellite images of the area of the man-made disaster show empty fields where rusting car wrecks should have stood. Friends, today there will be an interesting video about the Chernobyl zone. I will tell you about the equipment of the liquidators who took part in the liquidation of the Chernobyl accident in 1986–88. There is less and less of this equipment in the zone every year, and there are different reasons for this. The most radioactive equipment is gradually cut up and buried. Part of the equipment, which over 35 years has become clean, is recycled, and the last part simply falls apart by itself. For the past years the metal has simply rotted away, and the machines are falling apart. Originally, the graveyards of equipment in the zone was a few. The most famous of them located under the open sky Rysoka and Beryakovka. Such names the cemeteries were given by the names of the nearby villages. Rysoka Cemetery was one of the largest in the zone. There were a dozen helicopters Mi-6 and Mi-8, several IMRs of different modifications, armored personnel carriers, BRDMs, fire trucks ZIL, and many other vehicles. Today the Rysoka Cemetery does not exist. In 2006 the process of disposing of this most contaminated equipment began, and in 2012 officially ended. The Beryakovka Cemetery was on a much smaller scale. Partially it still exists today, but every year there is less and less machinery there. Some of it is being recycled, and some is being dismantled by the same looters. Much less known Technical Equipment Cemetery is situated on the outskirts of Pripyat in a former location of PRMK, a mobile mechanized column. Machinery here is not too much, but you can see some unique instances which have not been preserved anywhere else in the zone. For example, engineering machine demolition, IMD, in the best preserved in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, CEZ form. So in today's video the story of what became of the liquidators' equipment in Chernobyl. We go into the PMK territory. This is a fairly large area near the forest on the outskirts of Pripyat, lined with concrete airfield slabs. It is here, on the conditionally protected area, where the remnants of the liquidators' equipment are mostly preserved. The administration of the exclusion zone takes measures to keep it at least in some shape. In the photo is a huge engineer demolition vehicle, IMR, built on a tank chassis, and weighing about 45 tons. The IMRs were designed to cut roads through forests in difficult combat conditions, and at the same time provide some protection for the crew from radiation, which came in handy when working on the LPA in Chernobyl. The IMR has no tank turret with armament. There is only a small operator's turret, the observation windows in which are covered with thick armored glass. The equipment consists of dozer blade and boom with a gripper. The boom is able to clear large debris, and even uproot quite thick trees. Pay your attention to the CPM's grip on the photo. It is supported by an improvised welded stand. These measures are taken by the exclusion zone administration to keep the machine in more or less decent shape and not to break up before its time. I foresee questions about whether this thing has any phonics. Yes, it does, but within limits that are not too dangerous for short-term study of the equipment. In a couple of meters from the IMR, dosimeter shows typical levels for modern Pripyat, 2 to 4 times higher than normal, but up close, and with removed beta filter the dosimeter shows higher values from 400 to 800 microrentgen per hour. If you search well in the search mode of the dosimeter, you can find individual local points up to 1 to 2 millirentgen per hour on the hull of the IMR in the area of air ducts and track tracks. This is not the only CPM on the site. There is another specimen of something engineering, standing closer to the concrete fence near the forest. I start sniffing with the dosimeter already on distant approaches to the machine, but here we find nothing unusual that exceeds the background values. Either this car was used on relatively clean jobs, or it was contaminated with relatively short-lived radioisotopes that had already decayed/washed into the ground by the rains. As you can see, this thing is much worse preserved. It's all overgrown with moss. Heavy equipment has been standing there for over 3 decades. To be honest, this thing is very strange. After examining the equipment from all sides, I began to doubt, is it a CPM? Usually IMRs, both first and second model, have a small, non-turning armored turret where the operator sits, controlling the blade, and boom, the mechanic, the second crew member, sits a little lower. But here there is no armored tower, but instead there is some kind of cabin designed, apparently, for two people. From the side it somewhat resembles the Bat-2 tank, but that one has a more elegant cab, and, secondly, both the blade itself and the tank chassis look different. Even stranger cabin looks from the front. It looks like some clumsy box and, most likely, is not a factory product, but nothing but a Chernobyl homemade, created for any work in the zone. Such self-made items were made either directly in the zone at the industrial facilities of various mechanical workshops, or are manufactured in small numbers, 5 to 10 copies, on special orders at the factories near the zone. Up close the cabin looks like this. Small door with a protective seal against dust, fairly large, for military equipment, observation windows. Behind and above you can see some welded uprights and boxes, which once again says about the refinement of the device by local technicians. Inside view of the cabin of this mysterious monster. All valuable equipment, of course, has long been removed. Between the remains of the two seats lie the remains of a gray OZK suit with characteristic straps, and a clearly visible fastener, which was usually fixed with black plastic buttons called buttons or studs. And also pay attention to the window in the front part of the picture. It is covered with a usual plastic tray from the canteen. To all appearances, in the last weeks or days of equipment operation, the window glass was broken, and the operators attached this tray to the opening for at least some protection from dust and beta particles. Well, we go further and see several Bell AZ-540 trucks standing in a row on the site. The first two cars are no big deal. They are usual big dump trucks, used to transport loose bulk cargo, sand, rock masses, etc. I would assume that these trucks were used to remove soil, manually cut by soldiers, from Pripyat during its decontamination in 1986–88. But the third car, which is on the right side of the frame, is a more interesting thing. This is nothing more than a special vehicle UMP-1, developed on the basis of Bell AZ-7548. Instead of a collapsible body, it had a cistern of a huge volume which could hold about 30,000 liters of decontamination solution. On top of the car cabin there was a so-called hydromonitor on a gun carriage with an electric drive, which could be operated by the car driver directly from the cabin. It was assumed that such a powerful machine would be enough to decontaminate, wash, with special compounds, the 16-story buildings in Pripyat. The water jet was supposed to reach a height where ordinary fire trucks with a standard fire pump could not reach. But in practice everything was not so rosy. The fire monitor created such a strong pressure that the jet was striking up to 70 meters, and the windows, even on the upper floors of the houses, were simply knocked out by a tremendous pressure. So UMP-1 in the end just used to wash and decontaminate the streets of Pripyat in 1986–88 years. TZA-500, a fuel tanker, created on the basis of MAZ truck, and called filler in Chernobyl military jargon. As it is not difficult to guess from the name and purpose, this machine was used for supply of fuel and charging of all vehicles that worked in the zone. Cabins of dump trucks involved in the transportation of bulk cargo. As they are near Pripyat, most likely, they took part in relatively clean works on decontamination, removal of soil, and got not in very dirty Beryakovka and Raskoha, but here. Remains of a ZIL-130 base tanker, which was also used in the decontamination work. The characteristic tank of sort of rectangular cross-section indicates that it was not a tank for transportation of fuel and lubricants, but a sprinkler truck. You could still find such on the streets in the last years of the USSR and in the early 90s. The tank capacity was about 5,000 to 6,000 liters of water, which of course is not as impressive as the giant tank on the Bell AZ, but also something. In addition, the ZIL-130 had an electric brush, which allowed it to effectively pick up radioactive dust on the streets of Pripyat and flush it down the storm drain. The water cistern in this vehicle was once orange, but the cab of this modification and other ZIL 130s has always been blue. Why was it so? There are several versions. One of them says that the combination of white and blue was chosen to make the ZIL 130 special car was well noticeable on the roads and in the city. Well, another version says that in the Soviet Union were just a big stock of blue paint which were fused to the factory ZIL. Remains of two MAZ-537 airfield tractors, developed at the Minsk automobile plant. Such tractors were produced, by the way, not only in Minsk, but also at the Kurgan plant named after Karbyshev, having the abbreviation KZKT. All heavy equipment engines and huge wheels of meter height from tractors are removed long ago. In the corner of the site near the wood there are just two of their carcasses rotting. Trees are literally sprouting through them. The forest absorbs iron equipment, rubber tires, transuranic elements, and other man-made crap. Hardly recognizable remnants of some kind of wheeled tractors or dump trucks. It will take another 10 to 15 years, and there will be literally nothing left of this equipment. Time, rain, and snow will do their job. The PAZ bus, which has been turned over for the convenience of disassembly of the chassis, most likely, it was done in the 90s. Please note that the windows were sealed with lead sheeting, which means that the bus was used as a vehicle for trips to the dirty area. Such a graveyard of machinery was left in Chernobyl. What do you think? Be sure to write in the comments your opinion. What should be done with such an object? Should it be preserved for history and posterity? Or is it better to saw all this radioactive scrap metal and quickly forget about it? Tell us, it is interesting. If you were interested, thank the author by giving me a nickname. And also don't forget to subscribe, so you won't miss even more interesting videos on my channel. Turn on notifications by clicking bell and share this clip with your friends. What else interesting you can add on this video? Write in the comments, it will be interesting to read.